Ave Maria, and welcome to Divine Poetry, a series that explores the chronological parallels between the history of the Catholic Church and the Old Testament. If you're new to this concept, go back and watch my interview with Kevin Davis. The link is in the video description below. To make things more simple, I have divided up church history and the Old Testament into 8 color-coded time periods. Below you can see a scrolling bar with the names, dates, and the Old Testament books for each period. Use this timeline to guide you in each video. The color frame of each video will match the time period that we're discussing. Now, let's start today's episode. Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of Divine Poetry. This series of Divine Poetry, I started it with the intent of displaying the jaw-dropping chronological parallels between the Old Testament, Israel in the Old Testament, and Catholic Church history. These chronological parallels that go from start to finish and they go right up to our present day. It's truly a marvel to behold. So one of the most important parallels, I think, for us is those parallels between the books of the Maccabees and Vatican II, specifically the second altar in the temple and the abomination, and how that translates into our time in parallel to the Novus Ordo rite on the quote second quote altars in our formerly Catholic churches, or however you want to phrase that. So from that foundation of the identification of the abomination of desolation as the Novus Ordo, we were able to go into the book of Daniel and see how key prophecies in Daniel that mention the abomination are fulfilled also in the context of Vatican II. And that in turn gives us a key to open up some fulfillments and understandings in the book of the Apocalypse. And I've shown those things in my last couple videos, so I won't go over them all again right now. And I'm sure, as you're aware, I just finished writing a book, Vatican II and Antichrist, and I should be ordering about 200 or 300 copies of it in the next couple days. And usually it takes about 10 days to come in. So, that puts us maybe like July 20th when I'll start shipping them out. Hopefully July 20th. And that is fantastic. Now, the book, of course, comes with 3 color brochures, and those brochures demonstrate a lot of the concepts in the book. So you're going to have the fulfillment of the prophecy of the 70 weeks from Daniel chapter 9, and you'll also have the passion of Christ as it parallels the passion of the church. And then finally, you're going to have the book of the Apocalypse. Specifically, you're going to have the 2 witnesses, the 7-headed beast out of the sea, and the 2-horned lamb beast out of the earth. And those themes feature, they take central, they're a central part of the book, Vatican II and Antichrist. So, I like to have a graphical display to help to make them more easy to understand and to wrap your mind around. So that's the news on the book. You can always pre-order it if you want to. That is on our website here, gloriousheritagebooks.com. Now, in today's episode, I want to go over another concept that's in the book, and it's the 2 brothers and 7 kings of Rome, and how that seems to be happening again in our time, but in reverse order. And I'll explain that in a minute. Now, this system of, I guess you can call it parallels, I guess you can. It's not part of, it's a whole separate entity altogether. I hesitated a long time ago to bring forth these other concepts out because I didn't want to kind of muddle everything up and cause confusion. But I think you as the viewer who have been watching these now for I don't know how many weeks now, I'm pretty sure you have a firm enough, it's established in your minds well enough, the parallels between church history and the Old Testament. So what I'm bringing forth today is a new concept, but you'll see the logic of it in a little bit here. So, I guess to start with, we have to go through Roman mythological history. Because what it looks like it's happening is that the founding of Rome, the mythical founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus, seems to be being paralleled, or there's a symmetrical pattern with our times, but in reverse order. So first, let me go through the founding of Rome, which it's probably a story familiar to most of you. I'm just going to go through it again because, who remembers this in detail? And then from there, I'll take us into the reverse order of it happening in our time. It's pretty, it's fascinating. I'll just say it's really cool. Okay, so it all starts with the fall of Troy, the mythical fall of Troy. You might have heard about Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And they describe Odysseus, who is the Greek mythological hero, and how the city of Troy which was besieged by these Greek kings, how it fell. Okay, and when it fell, the Romans wrote about a man named Aeneas, and so the Romans wrote a story. I think it was, I want to say it's Virgil, I believe. I might get that wrong. Virgil wrote something called the Aeneas, and it's a Roman work. And so Aeneas fled the fall of Troy, and he fled to the Italian peninsula, and there he starts a city. I believe he starts a city called Alba Longa. Now he has some descendants, and then eventually there's two brothers who are descended from Aeneas, and there's Aemilius and Numitor. Now I might get this wrong, but one of the two brothers, I'm going to say Numitor. This might be backwards, but Numitor, he receives the kingdom from his father of Alba Longa, but Aemilius wants it. So Aemilius throws Numitor in kind of like jail. He kind of keeps him as a political prisoner, and he doesn't let him out. And he also takes his daughter Rhea Silvia and puts her into the service of the Vestal Virgins, which means that they won't be able to have children, and they have to remain in the temple of Vesta there. Now, the story goes is that the fake pagan god Mars visits Rhea Silvia, and she becomes pregnant with two sons, and that's Romulus and Remus. So when the king, now which one is it? Either Numitor or Aemilius, like whoever the bad one is, he takes these two boys and he puts them in a basket, and he sends them down the Tiber River in the expectation that they'll die of exposure. They'll just die from not being fed and being left out into the wild. Well, of course, then the she-wolf, she finds these two boys and she suckles them and feeds them and takes care of them for a short time until a Roman farmer and his wife, they find Romulus and Remus, and they raise them up, and they become a strong young men. And they each have a very large following of people that follow them, because in Roman mythology, they're demigods. They remember their father would be Mars and their mother is Rhea Silvia. So they're exceptionally strong and smart and all those things. Well, as they grow up, they find out that they want to found a city of their own. So they go off to where the she-wolf suckled them, on the banks of the Tiber River, and that would be where modern-day Rome is actually founded. And so they each want to start the city, but they disagree about which of the 7 hills to found it on. So Remus wants to go to the Aventine Hill, and Romulus wants to go to the Palatine Hill. Romulus starts to build a stone perimeter around where he wants to build a city. And so that's later, it's called the Pomerium in Roman history, but I guess that's a little beside the point. So when Remus crosses over that stone barrier in the course of an argument with his brother about where to found the city, Romulus says, "You just invaded my city," and he kills his brother. And in doing so, Romulus becomes the very first king of Rome. So Rome goes first from being 2 brothers, and then it goes to a kingdom. And now the kingdom, Romulus is the first king, and they have 7 kings. After the 7th king, the Romans, he was very oppressive, and he was dictatorial, and he was a tyrant. And so the Romans said, "We're done with this having kings. We're done with that. We're going to move over to having a republic." So the idea of a Roman republic comes, of course, like I said, after the period of the 7 kings. The republic lasts quite a long time. I believe it was founded in the 700s BC, and it lasts all the way up to the birth of Christ. The very first Roman emperor, who was identified as historians as being an emperor, was Augustus Caesar. And so again, if you remember the Gospels, our Lord was born during the census that was called by Augustus Caesar, the very first emperor of Rome. And just as a side note, Augustus Caesar called himself the Son of God. Dei Filius, or Filius Dei. It's just amazing that you have an emperor who's blasphemously calling himself the Son of God, when actually the true Son of God was born during his reign. It's awesome. God is so awesome. Okay, so then Rome has an empire, starting with Augustus. And that empire, in the West, it lasts until 476. That's the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire actually did live on quite a long time, and that actually lived on in the Byzantine Empire all the way to 1453, but we're going to leave that out for a second. So, like I said, I'm just going to recap real quick. Rome has 2 brothers, then 7 kings, and then you have your period of the Republic, and then the period of the Empire. So Western Roman Empire falls in 476, of course, and then there's this time where Europe is ruled by 10 different barbarian tribes. That ends definitively in the year 800, when, Pope Leo III, I believe it was, in the year 800, he calls Carloman, to Rome on Christmas Day, and he crowns him the first Holy Roman Emperor. So now you have a new Empire. It's the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Empire lasts for about 1,000 years. It goes from Charlemagne all the way in 800, all the way until 1806. So it lasts for 1,006 years. And it's ended by Napoleon. So the French Revolution comes along, and now, as we know, the French Revolution, it deposes and murders the last sovereign French king, Louis XVI, and it starts to set up a republic in France. So now we're transitioning now from the age of the Holy Roman Empire into the age of republics. So you can see we're following the reverse order of Rome. Rome goes from two brothers, seven kings, republics to empire, and now we're going from empire back to republics in Western Europe again. Napoleon comes along shortly after the French Revolution, and he deposes the very last Holy Roman Emperor in 1806. His name was Emperor Francis II, last one. Now we have the age of republics in Europe. Republics are forming up in one way or the other all over the place. And then in 1870, the republicanism is the idea of having a king or a potentate or a sovereign is anathema to the republics and to the Freemasons. So they especially therefore hate the Pope, because the Pope is, in 1870, he's really the last sovereign monarch left. He's the king of the Papal States, right? So the popes have had the Papal States since the time of basically Charlemagne. So in 1870, the Freemasons, the Italian Freemasons, they come and they invade the Papal States, and they steal the last of the Pope's land, which was the remaining portion of the Papal States in 1870. So now you have the Pope is still, obviously, and he always will be, a spiritual king, but technically speaking, he has no temporal land anymore. He can't be a temporal king anymore, at least for a while. Now you have the full-blown republicanism in Western Europe. You do have some monarchs left, but they're parliamentary monarchs like we have and figurehead monarchs like we have in England right now, for instance. Okay, now, in 1929, I've mentioned this many times, Mussolini, who wants to curry favor with Catholics in Italy, he signs the Lateran Treaty, which gives Pope Pius XI, he gives him some more territory again. He gives him present-day Vatican City. So now you have your very first king again. The Pope is a king, again, of Vatican City. You have Pope Pius XI as the first one, and then going through them, you have 7 until Benedict resigns, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But your 7 kings would be Pope Pius XI, Pope Pius XII, and then your 5 anti-popes, who, even though they were anti-popes, they still were temporal kings of actual physical land. That's arguable if they were legitimate kings of sovereign land or they were usurped. I mean, obviously they were anti-popes, but they still, I would say, still had a kingdom they were ruling over. Obviously, they functioned as kings, they acted as kings and everything, but there were 7. So you have your 2 real popes and your 5 anti-popes. Benedict XVI, like I said, he resigned on February 11th, which is the anniversary of the Lateran Treaty. And so now what I'm saying is we have 7 kings of Vatican City. And if you remember from our last video, that also corresponds with the 7-headed beast out of the sea. I advise you to go back and watch that as a refresher if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about. Recall, though, that in that same video I'm referring to, you had your 7 kings of Vatican City as the 7-headed beast out of the sea. And again, I want to reiterate, I don't have an answer for why there's 2 popes in that apocalyptic beast. But I give some thoughts about that in the book. I don't want to get into it, I guess, too much detail right now. But anyway, after that 7-headed beast out of the sea, you have another beast, the 2-horned lamb. And I point out that looks like Benedict Francis, who are ruling together as 2 brother anti-popes. So you have that same structure in the apocalypse of 7 and then 2. But that's also what happens in reverse order Roman history, which I'm going to get into in a minute. Because if you remember, Rome was founded by 2 brothers, then 7 kings. Now, we're going backwards now. So the backwards version of that would be the Holy Roman Empire, then the Age of Republics in Europe, and then you have your 7 kings. And then after Benedict resigns, he steps down, and then you have your 2 brothers again. So now you have Benedict Francis are the 2 brothers that would mirror Romulus and Remus at the beginning of Roman history. Now there's a lot more little details here I want to get into, which is some neat stuff. But so a couple things. If you remember, I mentioned that Romulus and Remus were fed by a she-goat, or excuse me, a she-wolf. So during the Amazon Synod of 2019, when the Pachamamas were on the altars in different Roman churches, you had one church in particular, it was Santa Maria Traspatina, which is just maybe a couple blocks away from the Vatican and pretty close to the Tiber River. I think it's like 500 yards, or I forget. It's pretty close. You could walk to it in like 10 minutes to the Tiber River. So if you remember, maybe some of you aren't aware, but I'll put a blurred picture of it on the screen because it's immodest and inappropriate. But they had posters in Santa Maria Traspatina on that day in 2019 of an Amazon woman breastfeeding a little dog. And so I remember seeing this way back in 2019. It was shocking and horrible and, typical of the Novus Ordo, I guess. So what I'm pointing at is that Romulus and Remus were breastfed by a wolf, but in the reverse order in our time, you have the inverse happening. Now you have, instead of an animal breastfeeding a person, you have a person breastfeeding a baby dog, a baby wolf. Amazing. And then shortly after that, you had that Austrian young man from Austria who came out later. And remember, he took the two Pachamamas out of that church and he threw them into the Tiber River. And they were fished out by Team Francis, a couple of days later. So just as Romulus and Remus were thrown into the Tiber River in a basket and then fished out, so too are these two Pachamamas thrown into the river and then fished out, right? Some other amazing little parallels that happen in reverse is that, if you remember, I just mentioned that either Numitor or Emilius, I can't remember which one's which, they kept Rhea Silvia and they kept the other brother who they were trying to stifle and kind of put into a political isolation. They put them into, they kept them as prisoners. And that's exactly what happened with Benedict when Francis became anti-pope. Benedict, there was speculation about if Benedict would ever leave Vatican City, or was he being kept there? There were unanswered questions, but those are swirling around. So you have the same thing happening. Francis wanted the throne, so he took his brother and he put him into some kind of isolation inside of Vatican City. And Benedict would not cross the boundary, the imaginary boundary line between Vatican City and Italy. It's a small place, Vatican City, but he wouldn't cross that boundary line. And that's like the Pomerium that I mentioned in Roman history. There's this imaginary line that goes around the city of Rome that it serves as its boundary line. So there's all these echoes of the ancient Roman mythology happening in recent Vatican history. Am I forgetting anything? So I guess the overall point of this, though, is that all this reverse order parallels points to the imminent abolition of Vatican City, because it would mirror the foundation of Rome in the beginning. And I'm speculating that the end of this whole thing would be the destruction of Vatican City, as would be paralleled by the destruction of Troy. You have this great siege happening in a city that would happen in Vatican City. I don't think it's going to be a physical destruction. In my book, I kind of give my ideas. First of all, I point out all the parallels and I point out all the interpretations of prophecy. Then I give a very small amount of speculative forecasting of the future, but I make sure I tell you this is just pure speculation. My point in doing that is not to predict anything, but to kind of like see how these things might play out based on my experience of how I saw other things play out. It doesn't always happen in a physical way, right? So what I'm expecting would be that the Lateran Treaty gets dissolved gets dissolved by the Italian government because the Italian government has the sole authority and potential to dissolve the Lateran Treaty. And what that would do is Vatican City would cease to be its own country. It would have no more, it wouldn't be sovereign anymore. And therefore the Vatican Bank, which is credibly suspected of being a money laundering institution for the mafia and for all kinds of underworld elements, they like that because it can't be audited by an external. There's no oversight over the Vatican Bank because it's a sovereign country. And also you wouldn't have diplomatic immunity for all of the criminals that leave their Novus Ordo parishes and they go hide in the Vatican so they can't be prosecuted. I've heard that happens from time to time as well. But what I'm saying is that the Vatican would be totally exposed by the removal of the Lateran Treaty, and that would really suffice to be the abolition of Vatican City and also the destruction of the Great Harlot, which is a whole other subject. Maybe I'll do another video on that sometime. But this is one of the topics I present in my book. Hopefully I was able to do it in some kind of coherent way. I see I'm already at 18 minutes, so I'll leave it at that. But okay, so I'll see you next week. Ave Maria, and glory be to God.